welcome. Do those dark corners, totally hidden from the public eye, truly exist? The so-called perfect crime? Over in Busan, there was a criminology professor, one who believed it absolutely. He knew every single detail of how police investigations worked. He always skirted the edge between good and evil, that thin gray line. He even had the guts to publicly declare that with tight enough logic, a flawless crime could absolutely happen. But everything started to shift. That is, until a hiking backpack, resting deep at the bottom of the Nakdong River, was suddenly pulled ashore by a fisherman. The horrifying truth hidden inside that bag pointed every single suspicion, every direct clue, straight back to that professor. The crime scene was wiped spotless, leaving zero trace. The getaway car was washed clean, then sold off, and even all the digital evidence had been completely wiped out. In this intense battle of wits between a criminology expert and the police, the truth seemed completely rewritten. But was the plan actually without a flaw? Today, let's break down every little detail to uncover the hidden truth behind this digital fog. Our true crime story starts in Busan. It is South Korea's largest port city, usually bringing to mind pictures of crowded beaches and stunning coastal views, along with countless skyscrapers packed tight. But out in the western part of the city, near the borders, the scenery completely flips. Those towering skyscrapers vanish, giving way to a massive stretch of river, and endless tidal flats stretching as far as you can see. This is the Nakdong River estuary, where the Ulsukdo Bridge spans across the water. It is totally different from the loud chaos of downtown. It is incredibly quiet out here, acting as a home for countless migratory birds. Normally, it is just fishermen casting their nets here to make a living. But beneath that peaceful river water, the environment is actually incredibly complex. The deep, unpredictable undercurrents at the estuary are strong enough to bury so many secrets in the dark. And then, on a day that felt as ordinary as any other, from the muddy bottom of the Nakdong River, a heavy object slowly breached the surface, along with a tangled fishing net. A horrifying discovery inside was about to see the light. A shocking true crime case that would shake all of South Korea. May 21st, 2011. It was Saturday. The weather in Busan was already getting hot and sticky near the estuary. A local fisherman was standing right on the deck of his boat, expertly working the gear. He started his usual morning routine, with the engine humming away. The heavy net at the riverbed was dragged up bit by bit. Suddenly, the loud sound of the winch turned, unusually strained. The guy was startled, his heart skipping a beat. Then, a quick flash of excitement hit him. He thought to himself, with this kind of weight, could I have hit the jackpot and snagged some kind of massive monster fish? So, the fisherman focused all his attention on running the machinery. He stared hard right at the river surface, hoping for a huge haul. But when the dripping net finally broke the surface of the water, what appeared before his eyes was not a giant school of fresh fish thrashing wildly. It was a massive, pitch-black object. The fisherman had to struggle hard just to drag that heavy object onto the deck. Only then did he clearly see it was a hiking backpack. A black backpack, the edges still faintly showing some decorative details in dark red. The zipper was completely rusted shut. It looked like it had been soaking underwater for quite a long time. The bag was strangely heavy. He had a sinking gut feeling that whatever was tucked inside was definitely not ordinary. Driven by sheer curiosity, the fisherman held his breath, reached out, and yanked hard on the rusted zipper of that backpack. When he finally made out what was inside, he stumbled backward in pure horror, nearly collapsing to the dirt. Stuffed inside that heavy backpack was a woman's body. Heavy iron chains wrapped tightly around her. Being underwater for that long left the corpse completely unrecognizable and disfigured. Realizing exactly what he had just found, the fisherman didn't waste a single second. He called the cops immediately. Wailing sirens soon shattered the dead silence of the riverbank. Police cruisers pulled up to the crime scene fast. Moving fast, forensic teams set up a perimeter and did a quick preliminary exam right there on the dirt. Early reports showed the victim was roughly 50 years old. Deep, ugly strangulation marks bruised her neck. The official cause of death ruled mechanical asphyxiation. That just means the victim was completely cut off from oxygen, because some massive external force crushed her airway, basically being violently strangled or smothered. Looking at the terrible decay of the remains, the forensics team concluded the victim had been rotting at the bottom of that river for at least a month. To identify the woman, investigators quickly pulled her fingerprints and ran a match through the missing persons database. Those results hit incredibly fast. Shockingly, this dead woman was no random stranger. This was Mrs. Park, a wildly successful CEO who vanished into thin air in Busan 2 months earlier. Her sudden disappearance had already sparked a massive uproar across Busan, so when the body was officially identified, this murder case instantly grabbed the absolute attention of the entire country of South Korea. At the time, 50-year-old Mrs. Park owned a hugely prestigious tutoring center in Busan, and she raked in some serious money. She was slender, always kept her short hair perfectly styled, and gave off this truly elegant, graceful charm. To anyone meeting her, she was the absolute textbook definition of a strong, highly successful career woman. But her love life was nowhere near as smooth as her business. Like anyone, she just wanted a partner to lean on as she got older. So the single Mrs. Park got set up with a university professor. This guy, Professor Kang, was 3 years older than her. Professor Kang had an insanely impressive background. He graduated from a top-tier university and taught classes at a very famous college down in southern South Korea. But even more impressive, he was a top-tier expert, a total heavyweight. In the whole Korean cybercrime field, Professor Kang was an incredibly busy, highly demanded guy. He didn't just stand at a college podium all day, he also worked as an expert consultant for both the cops and the local prosecutor. His main job was stepping in to help collect digital evidence, mostly focusing on recovering deleted data. So criminals hiding behind a computer monitor had nowhere left to run. To anyone looking in, Mrs. Park and Professor Kang looked like the ultimate power couple. Finding a perfect match later in life, finally having someone real to lean on, felt like pure, incredible luck for her. But this supposedly flawless, picture-perfect marriage quickly started showing some serious cracks. Right after tying the knot, Mrs. Park found out, to her absolute horror, that Professor Kang had completely hidden his past divorce. Plus, his private life was a total mess, and making matters much worse, brutal financial issues started boiling up between the newlyweds, pretty much from day one of the marriage. Professor Kang borrowed millions of won, about 5.5 billion dong, from his wife, and flat out refused to repay it. When she demanded to know where the cash went, he completely refused to say a word. All this tension led to constant, bitter screaming matches. Neither one of them would ever budge. By September 2010, barely 6 months after they walked down the aisle together, Mrs. Park got her own place. They started living totally separate lives, and eventually the divorce papers were officially filed. Fast forward to April 2nd, 2011. That was the very last time Mrs. Park was ever caught alive on a security camera. Right before heading out, she told her family she was meeting up with Professor Kang to finally settle the money side of their messy divorce. But somewhere along the way, she disappeared without a trace, just completely vanished into thin air. Her calls went straight to voicemail. The family was completely frantic. Her younger brother immediately thought of the professor. He dialed Kang's number to find out what was happening. No answer. Dead silence. 3 whole days later, the brother tried calling him again. This time, the professor finally picked up, but he swore up and down he never even saw his wife. He actually suggested she probably just ran away, but her own family firmly believed she would never just abandon her life. So they marched right down to the police station and filed a missing persons report. As the absolute last person she planned to see before vanishing, Professor Kang naturally became the prime suspect in the investigation. But he completely refused to cooperate, tossing out the excuse that they were in the middle of a bitter divorce. He saw zero reason to sit down and talk. So, on the exact day she disappeared, he insisted he had absolutely no plans to see her. Instead, the professor handed the cops what looked like an airtight alibi. When his estranged wife went missing, he claimed he spent the entire day hanging out with his hiking club. Coming off the trail that evening, he stopped at a local tavern for a solo drink. When investigators tracked down the owner to verify his story, the bartender completely backed up the professor. If this really was a homicide that night, on paper, Professor Kang just did not have the window to pull it off. Beyond that, during those crucial early days, detectives could not find one single scrap of physical evidence linking the husband to the missing woman. Desperate, her family printed 100,000 missing person flyers and plastered them nationwide. They even offered a huge cash reward of 100 million won, roughly equal to 1.8 billion Vietnamese dong. The intense search dragged on for 50 long days, that is, until a heavy backpack floated. Up from the murky bottom of the Nakdong River, forensics locked in the time of death. It perfectly matched the night she vanished. This wasn't just a missing person anymore. A full-blown murder investigation was back on. Suddenly, Professor Kang, the guy they had practically cleared of all suspicion once again, found himself squarely in the crosshairs, because the bag holding his wife's remains, it was a hiking backpack. That single glaring detail made detectives instantly think back to the professor's timeline on the day of the murder. He had forcefully insisted he was out trekking with his hiking club. Sure, a trail bag is a pretty standard piece of outdoor gear, but this morbid coincidence sent up massive red flags. The police had to figure out, once and for all, if the guy was flat out lying to them. Investigators circled back to hammer away at the bedrock of his alibi, that little local bar he supposedly drank at that night. During the first round of questioning, the owner had totally covered for Kang, telling cops that on the night of the killing, the professor showed up pretty early and just nursed his drinks until way past midnight. With a timeline like that, the husband literally could not have pulled off a murder. Back then, cops jotted down his notes and just walked right out the front door. They completely missed the bar owner breathing a massive sigh of relief. But what that guy never saw coming was that just a few weeks later, homicide detectives would be knocking on his door again. When they slammed the grim, hard facts of the homicide down on the counter, the guy looked completely terrified. Eyes darting, sweating, totally stumbling over his words. Finally, under the crushing pressure of the interrogation, he completely cracked and confessed the truth. He dropped one chilling little detail that would make your blood run cold. He admitted that on the night of the crime, the professor really did show up to drink alone. The catch? He rolled in way after midnight, 1:30 in the morning, to be exact. He slammed down a single drink, locked eyes with the bartender, and issued a dark warning about what to say if the cops ever came asking questions. Let's just say he told people he got to the bar way earlier than he really did, when the news hit that Professor Kang's wife had vanished. The bar owner definitely had his doubts, but he was totally spooked by the professor's powerful reputation. Scared of getting dragged into the mess, he just kept quiet. As for that alibi, Professor Kang's story was already crumbling. With this new tip, detectives immediately focused on tracking his every move. They expanded their criminal investigation around that specific time frame, and eventually, the cops found hard proof that both of them showed up in the exact same spot right after each other. It was all captured on an extended review of the security tapes. The very last place the victim, Mrs. Park, was spotted alive, a vacation condo over in Haeundae District, out in Busan. The timeline, the exact same night she went to see Professor Kang, at 10:47 p.m. that night. Surveillance cameras near the building caught her car pulling in. But just a little bit later, she drove right back out of the frame and disappeared without a single trace. By widening the search of the video footage, detectives finally struck gold with a massive clue. Roughly 40 minutes before that, Professor Kang had also shown up near that exact same condo. Let's check the map. Here is Professor Kang's house, located in Buk District, Busan, sitting on the east bank of the Nakdong River. That spot, down south, is where they eventually found the victim, Mrs. Park, which is right at the mouth of the Nakdong River, near Olsukdo Bridge. Now, the absolute last place Mrs. Park was caught on camera was over in Haeundae District, right along the eastern coast of Busan. Geographically speaking, the suspect's house is roughly 15 kilometers away from Haeundae as the crow flies. That's a solid 30-minute drive, and it was already the dead of night. So why in the world would he suddenly drive all that way? Detectives had every reason to be suspicious. They firmly believed that on the night of the murder, he drove out to Haeundae on purpose to meet Mrs. Park, and then he threatened the bar owner to hide his tracks. Investigators thought they had him boxed in, but when confronted with the physical evidence, Professor Kang was chillingly calm. He stared at the grainy security footage and smoothly fired right back at the detectives. How can you possibly be so sure that the guy in this video is actually me? After all, Professor Kang was a top-tier expert in the field of criminology. He knew exactly how weak video evidence could be in court. If he just flat-out denied it, it would be incredibly tough for cops to prove he did it based on nothing but a blurry tape. During the entire police interrogation, Professor Kang was practically flawless. He never slipped up once. But the absolute second he walked out of that police station, his entire body started violently shaking. The guy practically collapsed on the sidewalk. That one brief reaction was everything the cops needed to see. It totally cemented their theory that he was the guy who killed his wife. Usually, cell phone, GPS, and dashcam data give you the most direct criminal evidence. But right as the detectives were getting ready to search the professor's personal electronics, something way more suspicious popped up. Professor Kang's phone was completely brand new. Even the SIM card had just been swapped out, and the timing? It lined up perfectly with the very day after Mrs. Park was reported missing. On top of that, the professor's personal laptop had been completely wiped and reformatted several times. Every last trace of his search history was wiped clean. Man, he was even in the middle of selling his car off to a used car lot. But his most calculated move? He completely destroyed the digital SIM card from his old phone. That little card acts like a digital fingerprint for the cell network. You can swap out the actual phone hardware all you want, but if that chip survives, the phone's exact location at any moment can be easily recovered. Now, logically speaking, if your wife mysteriously vanishes. Even if you're a husband in a completely dead, loveless marriage, you wouldn't frantically destroy all of your personal digital data like that. Like the old saying goes, where there's smoke, there's absolutely fire. As a forensics guy, Professor Kang knew exactly how damning digital data could get. He was obviously doing whatever it took to pull off the ultimate murder cover-up. He wiped all the GPS tracking data from the time of the murder. But sometimes being way too clever just blows up in your face. This cover-up actually did the exact opposite. It proved that the erased digital footprint held some seriously damning clues. And it handed the detectives a brand new angle to investigate. Look, a lot of folks assume that once you factory reset a smartphone, that the digital evidence is just gone for good. But reality is completely different. On a modern cellular network, your mobile device is really just a dummy terminal. Shoot a text, and it doesn't just fly straight to your buddy's screen. It bounces off the carrier's cell towers first. Then, everything gets logged in the central servers buried deep inside massive telecom data centers. That data does not just vanish into thin air. Same deal with location tracking. If a cell is powered up, the SIM card acts like a homing beacon, pinging the closest cell towers non-stop. Even if a suspect swaps out the SIM or smashes it to pieces, the network's back-end servers always keep a hard record of those tower pings. Unless Professor Kang somehow had root access to the telecom network to slip in and doctor the cell logs himself, which meant that somewhere deep inside those primary servers, there was a really solid chance the raw, untouched server data was still sitting there. So, since Kang scrubbed all his local phone records, homicide detectives decided to jump straight up the chain of command to dig out the facts. The Busan Police Department scrambled their elite cyber forensics squad, driving straight through the night, pushing north straight to the corporate headquarters of the major cell carriers and social media giants up in Seoul. It did not take long at all. A massive break hit the command center after Mrs. Park. Professor Kang actually walked right into the social media company's main office. While inside, he flashed his academic title, claiming he was running an academic study. He literally tried to use top-level system access to permanently delete one specific record. It was a single text message he had fired off to somebody else. It just read, "Make up your mind." Who the hell was he talking to, and about what? The investigators quickly figured out that whoever got that message could be the missing puzzle piece, the key to ripping this entire dark conspiracy wide open. The cybercrimes unit hunted down the user profile. Finally, a woman named Miss Choi surfaced from the digital footprint. At the time of the case, she was 50 years old. As the detectives dug into her background, a buried secret spanning years finally dragged into the light. Turns out, the history between Professor Kang and Miss Choi went all the way back to the year 2004. Back then, Professor Kang's academic career was just starting to skyrocket. But his personal life? A complete train wreck. He was suffocating in a miserable marriage and drinking heavy just to cope. With all his late-night social events, he constantly had to hire designated drivers. Just by chance, one of those drivers happened to be Miss Choi. She drove smooth, had this calm, easygoing vibe, and she'd always listen to the professor vent about his day, honestly, on a normal day. These were two people from entirely different planets. But inside the tight, quiet space of that sedan, over dozens of late-night drives home, a real emotional bond quietly flared up between them. From then on out, Miss Choi became his exclusive go-to driver. The two got incredibly close, and slowly but surely, it crossed the line into a full-blown affair. Thinking back to that deleted text message, make up your mind the ugly truth was finally bleeding through. The cops suspected Miss Choi knew way more than she claimed. She might have even been directly involved in plotting against Mrs. Park. They immediately raided her apartment, ready to slap cuffs on her, but came up totally empty-handed. Airport immigration logs showed that right before Mrs. Park's body was even found by police, Miss Choi apparently caught wind that something was wrong. She booked a flight straight to the United Arab Emirates. And right now, she was still laying low overseas. She completely ghosted the world. She wouldn't even reply to a single text from her own family. Detectives pulled her visa expiration dates and figured out that she could only stay out of South Korea for under a month. She had to fly back by the end of May. So, the Homicide Task Force slapped a red notice on her, putting her under extreme watch, waiting for the second she stepped off a plane. Meanwhile, the cyber team was burning the midnight oil, fighting like crazy to recover that scrubbed data. 3 grueling days and nights of non-stop work later, detectives finally managed to recover the digital data Professor Kang thought he had wiped. His entire web of lies fell apart. Sitting in the interrogation room, Professor Kang swore up and down he never saw his wife that day, or even reached out to her. But those recovered files told a completely different story about their communication. They were texting constantly. Earlier that day, Professor Kang actually made the first move, begging his wife, Mrs. Park, to meet up. He wanted to hash out splitting their assets for the divorce, and that was the exact reason why Mrs. Park, who was already separated from him, showed up completely alone in Haro District that night. On top of that, even though Professor Kang aggressively denied being the guy caught on the surveillance footage, the recovered cell tower records proved that during the exact window between 10 and 11 that night, his phone signal kept pinging towers right in the Ha area. Investigators pointed out that at exactly 11 p.m., Professor Kang fired off one last text message to his wife. During that critical 10-minute window, from 11:16 to 11:26, a friend called his phone 3 separate times in a row, but Professor Kang missed every single ring. This made it crystal clear. During those 10 minutes, he was likely busy, doing something so incredibly urgent he could not even free up his hands. Meaning Professor Kang probably met his wife right at that exact moment and was gearing up for murder. Yet the professor did not even flinch. He turned right around and mocked the detectives, telling them their questions were totally amateur. From a purely technical standpoint, sending a text and making a phone call are completely different things. Sure, he sent a text. But so what? His wife might have ignored it. All the current evidence just proved they were hanging around the same neighborhood, not that they actually met face to face. But investigators were holding on to evidence that went way deeper. In the early morning hours, Mrs. Park's cell phone finally died, but it did not power down anywhere near Ha District. It pinged near Professor Kang's place, specifically the Gwanduk-dong area in Buk District, Busan. Even more damning, Professor Kang's own phone location at that exact second put him in the exact same spot. At this point, he still had a full hour before showing up at his local bar, meaning he had more than enough time on the clock to pull the whole thing off. This location data acted like puzzle pieces, slowly snapping together to rebuild the entire deadly timeline of Professor Kang's movements that night. Earlier that day, he acted totally normal while hanging out and doing activities with his mountain climbing club, laughing, smiling, and chatting it up with everyone. But behind the scenes on that hike, he was aggressively texting his wife. Playing it cool, he claimed he wanted to pay back some borrowed money. They finally agreed on 11 p.m. in Ha District to have a serious sit-down about their divorce settlements. Around 10 p.m., Professor Kang parked his car in He District, waiting in the dark. 40 minutes later, Mrs. Park was close by. She stepped out of her vehicle, got a quick text from her husband, and walked right to him. Right after that, absolute tragedy struck. Detectives think that shortly after picking up his wife, the killer made his brutal move inside the car. Then he drove her body, heading straight west, cutting right across Busan, driving for a solid half hour, back to his home in Gwandeok-dong, Buk District. At the break of dawn, Professor Kang finally powered down the cell phone, belonging to his wife, cutting off her very last connection with the world. After hiding the evidence, he immediately fired up his car engine and bolted to his usual bar. When he walked in, it was already 11:30 in the morning. Inside, he used threats and heavy manipulation, forcing the bar owner to give him a fake alibi. He needed to build an absolutely airtight alibi on the timeline. So, how did this guy manage to dodge every single camera and secretly dump his wife into the Nakdong River? Shortly after Professor Kang was officially arrested, his mistress, Miss Choi, facing relentless family pressure, finally realized she couldn't outrun this nightmare any longer. She booked a flight back home, but detectives were already waiting in position. At Incheon Airport, Miss Choi was in handcuffs the second she stepped off that plane. With both suspects securely in custody, the grim reality of this murder case spilled out. Detectives figured out this wasn't some sudden crime of passion. It was a cold, heavily calculated plot that had been brewing for months. Professor Kang had wiped and reformatted both his personal and work computers over and over again. But from the restored data, forensic experts found that way before the killing ever happened, he obsessively searched for one exact phrase: how to commit the perfect murder without leaving a single trace. Right then and there, the dark idea of eliminating his wife, Mrs. Park, fully took root in his brain. To guarantee the cops would never look his way, Professor Kang leaned on the one single person he trusted over everyone else, his mistress, Choi. They divided the grim tasks flawlessly. Professor Kang played the mastermind running the whole operation, while Miss Choi scouted the drop sites, scrubbed the crime scene spotless, and handled the heavy lifting of the dirty work. Store cameras actually recorded Professor Kang buying a massive hiking backpack right before the killing. Across town, Miss Choi went off the radar to grab heavy iron chains and extra gear. They drove out to the Saha district in southern Busan multiple times, aggressively hunting for the ultimate spot to hide a body. They picked the mouth of the Nakdong River right by the Olsukdo Bridge, hoping those deep waters would swallow their crime and keep it buried at the bottom of the sea forever. To cover his tracks, Professor Kang totally stopped seeing Miss Choi face to face. They strictly stuck to text messages. He honestly believed that just hitting delete on his phone meant he was bulletproof. He just never realized a cloud backup would drag his darkest secrets out into broad daylight. And get this, just 24 hours before the murder actually went down, Professor Kang was primed to strike. He strolled into his university job that morning, acting like everything was perfectly fine. He ordered Miss Choi to wait on standby near his house while he prepared to trap his wife at the college campus, force her into his car, and end her life. But just seconds before launching the nightmare, the professor realized the school grounds were totally blanketed in security cameras, which would easily expose exactly what they were up to. So, he instantly hit the brakes on the whole operation. After rethinking his murder plot, he figured striking out in Haeundae over 10 kilometers from their house was a much safer bet. He reasoned that because he hardly ever visited the area, detectives wouldn't even bother tracking his digital footprint over there. Miss Choi took charge of mapping out the getaway route, memorizing the blind spots for every single street camera. On day 0 of month 0, the deadly duo finally put their twisted scheme into action. Professor Kang managed to bait his wife out to a quiet condo parking lot over in Haeundae. a total blind spot with zero cameras. After taking her life, he sped straight back to his own neighborhood. Miss Choi was already parked there, waiting for his signal. Together, they wrapped those heavy iron chains tightly around Mrs. Park's lifeless body, stuffing her into the massive hiking bag. Following his strict instructions, Miss Choi drove directly to the Yosukdo Bridge to drop the victim in the river. Meanwhile, Kang walked into a local bar to lock down a rock-solid alibi for the night. The wild part? Because she scouted the route so flawlessly, Miss Choi completely bypassed almost every single traffic camera while moving the body across town. Sure, she got caught on tape in a couple of random spots, but since she looked like just any normal commuter out on the road, she flew totally under the radar. Because of that, right up until the very minute Mrs. Park was finally discovered, absolutely nobody suspected what this dark duo had done. In the brutal days that followed, her family frantically handed out missing person flyers, even putting up a massive cash reward for clues. The ongoing tragedy completely rocked the local community. But Professor Kang, he didn't sweat a single drop. Flexing his heavy IT background, he wiped every single byte of digital evidence he could find. He even made a point to thoroughly wash. He scrubbed the murder vehicle until it was spotless. Then he sold it to a local used car lot. But he didn't count on the police tracking down those exact transaction records. They intercepted the vehicle. From there, investigators tore apart every single inch of the interior. Eventually, they found a tiny trace of blood, jammed deep inside the seat crevices and tucked behind the armrests. Once tested, the DNA came back as a perfect match to Miss Park. Even when detectives slammed that lab report right on the table, Professor Kang stubbornly denied everything. He claimed Miss Park just had a nosebleed while riding around earlier that week. According to him, it didn't actually prove a thing. That is, until the cops pulled a tiny hairpin out of an evidence bag. This specific hairpin was found wedged tightly into the passenger seat gap. It was the exact clip Miss Park had in her hair that very morning, the only physical trace she managed to leave behind. Right in the final moments of her life, during that desperate, violent struggle inside the car, that hairpin was the final nail in the coffin. It forced Professor Kang into dead silence. He finally hung his head and confessed to the brutal murder. Meanwhile, Miss Choi broke down way faster than he did. Hoping to get a lighter sentence, she spilled every dark detail of the murder, the chat logs. The ones they manually deleted, they actually recorded every step of the conspiracy way before the crime happened. Professor Kang sent her a text saying he was heading out to grab a large hiking backpack. Miss Choi texted back that she was already waiting at the bridge. They planned to go scout the area together later that night. Once the deed was done, Professor Kang pushed her to flee overseas and lay low for a bit. He told her to stay gone until things finally cooled off. Miss Choi hid abroad, but she lived in constant terror of being caught. She barely slept a wink for days. Then, she saw the breaking news. The victim's body had been discovered. Right then, her mental defenses totally crumbled. After that, between the intense police pressure and her family begging her to stop running, she finally flew home to face the music. Miss Choi just sobbed uncontrollably right there in the interrogation room. Crying, she confessed that from the moment she met Professor Kang, he had her under his absolute control. She was trapped in his toxic web. She even believed that helping him murder his wife was the ultimate proof of their twisted love. But by now, all those tired excuses were just empty, meaningless words. He was a high-status intellectual and a cybercrime expert, a guy who knew every legal loophole. She was his hidden mistress, willing to act as the weapon for his dark schemes, always ready at his beck and call. They genuinely thought that by flexing their digital skills and trashing the physical evidence, they could easily get away with murder. But they forgot one big rule: the internet never forgets. And the physical traces you leave behind can never be entirely washed clean. Before long, prosecutors in Busan officially indicted both of them. Professor Kang, a man who was once known as a highly respected criminology expert, standing proudly at the college podium, now faces the absolute harshest penalties of the law. When the dark details went public, the story sparked massive outrage and heated debates all across the country. Professor Kang was a brilliant cybercrime expert. Why would a guy who knows the law backward and forward break the law, risking absolutely everything to commit cold-blooded murder? Well, the truth is shockingly simple. Professor Kang had a stellar professional reputation, but behind closed doors, his personal life was a total disaster. His reckless spending habits led to crushing financial debt. Miss Park was his wife, and from day one, their marriage was entirely about the money. As the CEO of a massive tutoring center over in Busan, Miss Park had incredibly deep pockets. When they tied the knot, she handed him 300 million South Korean won, which is roughly $225,000, to support him. But Professor Kang didn't invest a single dime of that cash into their marriage. Instead, he used the funds to buy a house for his own biological daughter later on in their marriage. Professor Kang repeatedly demanded to borrow even more money from Miss Park. Naturally, the bitter tension between them finally boiled over. Right then, Mrs. Park discovered the hidden affair between Professor Kang and Miss Choi. She was absolutely livid. She filed for divorce immediately, demanding he pay back every single cent he owed her. That included the initial 300 million won. If he refused, she was taking him to court. Professor Kang had zero way to pay her back, and his wife was already pushing the divorce. Kang was drowning in financial pressure. Plus, Miss Choi's testimony laid his raw greed out in the open. It fully exposed the professor's true colors. He actually promised Miss Choi that if his wife, Mrs. Park, simply vanished one day, he would inherit a massive fortune. Then, he could buy a house for her kid and open the dream cafe Miss Choi always wanted. Meanwhile, Professor Kang was obsessed with his reputation. His public image as an elite expert was everything to him. He ran the Korean Computer Crime Research Association and regularly consulted for both the police and prosecutors. The professor was terrified his divorce would blow up into a massive scandal if his wife fought dirty. Hiding his marriage, swindling cash, the messy private life, all his dark secrets would be dragged into the spotlight. If that happened, the flawless public image he spent years building would shatter overnight. So, Kang started plotting a seriously twisted fantasy, pulling off the perfect crime. He was arrogant enough to think that if he could just make his wife disappear forever, the police would write it off and close the case as a standard missing person. That way, he would wipe his debts and save his career. Plus, as her husband, he would legally inherit her entire fortune. Even before the killing, Professor Kang bragged to his friends about it more than once. He loved boasting that, even today, getting away with the perfect crime was totally doable. He claimed if he did it, he would never get caught. That creepy arrogance sent shivers down everyone's spine, especially his students. They could never have imagined in their wildest dreams that the righteous professor lecturing at the podium hid such a twisted, unspeakable truth. 6 months after the murder, the initial trial kicked off at the Busan District Court. Professor Kang and Miss Choi faced charges for murder, dumping a body, and a long list of other offenses. Prosecutors argued Kang did not just commit a brutal crime, he weaponized his professional expertise to straight up mock the justice system. The sheer cruelty of this case was absolutely staggering. They demanded the maximum penalty. Following a brutal trial, the Busan District Court finally delivered its verdict. Kang was found guilty of murder and multiple other charges, landing him 30 years behind bars. Miss Choi was convicted of abandoning a body, plus other charges. She got 10 years in prison. The second that ruling dropped, it sent massive shockwaves through the entire South Korean legal system. This verdict was a historic milestone because it landed right at a major turning point in criminal law. Just a year before the killing, the South Korean National Assembly officially passed a strict amendment to the criminal code. Before this shift, sentencing guidelines in South Korea's justice system were actually pretty lenient. The absolute maximum prison term was only 15 years, even for multiple serious felonies with aggravated charges. The strict cap was 25 years, but with the public growing louder and angrier, demanding the justice system finally crack down on violent crimes. The law got a massive overhaul. They literally doubled the maximum sentence to 30 years. With stacked charges, the absolute maximum could hit 50 years. In October of that year, the new laws officially went into effect, which meant Professor Kang became one of the very first to grab the live wire right after the new criminal code kicked in. Now, if the max penalty is 50 years, a 30-year prison sentence might not sound huge. But in the South Korean justice system, unless you have multiple victims, a standard homicide charge rarely gets a maximum sentence. Catching 30 years was considered the absolute harshest penalty at the time, ever handed down for a single murder in the history of the South Korean courts. That record would finally break years later, when, in 2022, a man was indicted. He stalked his female co-worker for a really long time. Right before his sentencing hearing, he brutally killed her. It stood out as a shocking true crime case. But it involved years of stalking, a vicious revenge killing. The severity of this crime was completely off the charts. The judge ultimately hit him with a life sentence, with this heavy ruling against Professor Kang. The court sent a massive wake-up call to society, showing that high intelligence and specialized expertise will never shield you from prison time. He knew the law perfectly, broke it anyway, and tried to outsmart the justice system. Actually, his intellect made things worse. The judge threw the book at him for it. Facing life behind bars, Professor Kang refused to back down and filed an appeal. Soon after, the criminal appeal went to trial. The higher court took note that the professor, Kang, was a first-time offender. They actually slashed his sentence down to 22 years behind bars. Since Miss Choi did not get her hands dirty with the actual murder, her penalty dropped too. She got 5 years in prison. In the end, the South Korean Supreme Court locked in the ruling from the appeal. The criminal investigation officially closed. This once highly respected academic will now spend his best years rotting in a prison cell. 5 years later, Miss Choi finished her time and walked free. She faded right back into normal everyday society, likely trying to block out the entire terrifying nightmare. Meanwhile, Professor Kang is still sitting in a prison cell today. He, honestly, thought that he could erase a murder just like wiping a computer hard drive, deleting it from real life. But he missed one massive detail. True justice is not just a digital file you can easily edit. Out in the real world, there is absolutely no such thing as a perfect crime. Kang might have trashed his digital files, bleached his car interior spotlessly clean, but he could never, ever scrub away the ugly truth, because once a dark fantasy bleeds into real violence, it leaves a permanent physical stain, one that nobody can ever wash away. So that closes the dark chapter on Professor Kang. His desperate chase for the perfect crime is officially over. But it drops a heavy lesson on all of us. This killer, who genuinely seemed like the smartest guy in the room, used his huge intellect and every sneaky trick to bury his crime, but eventually, the truth claws its way to the surface, even if it boils down to buried digital footprints that seem totally wiped clean from a computer hard drive or invisible tiny specks of blood, a random hairpin shoved under a car seat, all of them turned into rock-solid criminal evidence. They stand as a pretty brutal reminder that living in our modern connected era, every single move you make leaves a digital fingerprint behind somewhere. Physical clues just waiting to be uncovered by detectives. Whenever the law comes knocking, getting away with murder is just a total myth. A sick, delusional fantasy the killer played out in his head, because pure evil, no matter how calculated it may be, can never escape the blinding light of the truth. And that wraps up today's true crime video. Catch you guys next time. Stay safe out there. See you very soon.